Good morning, church. Let's talk about 1 Corinthians chapter 3. There's a lot in this chapter about division and unity, and then there's a lot in this chapter about wisdom. But I wanted to focus on two verses. Look at verses 16 and 17. It says, "Do you not know that you are God's temple, and that God's Spirit dwells in you? If anyone destroys God's temple, God will destroy him. For God's temple is holy, and you are the temple." When I read that question, when I read that section, I was forced to ask myself the question, what's at stake when I sin? A lot of times, especially the little sins, the sins that nobody else may know about ever, or the sins that I don't even think about, I just brush them off and I don't give them that much thought. Or the sins that have stuck around with me for a long time, they're real serious habits, or they're just part of my identity. I can't let them go. It's easy for me to just kind of paint over those and just say, well, that's just who I am, or that's just something. It's just a little piece of who we are. You can say the same thing about our culture. But when we talk about division in the church, or when we talk about making wise choices, or we talk about choosing righteousness over sin, whether it's a big choice or a little choice, these verses really ratchet up the stakes. God's Spirit dwells in us. That means we're just like the temple of the Old Testament, where you remember the story of Aaron's sons. They do one little thing wrong. They offer fire in a different way than God has designed. It's not even that they were offering fire to a false god, but they do things, just the ceremony is just wrong. And God kills them both in an instant. And the priests who would go into the Holy of Holies once a year to offer a sacrifice had to have a rope and bells tied around their feet so that if they went into God's presence when we're unholy in even the smallest way, they were going to drop over dead and they could be dragged out. The Israelites were told this is very serious to be in the temple of God, and yet now we are the temple of God. How seriously do we take that? Are we really being critical of ourselves and saying, rooting out those areas of sin that have just nested for years, or are we just kind of brushing over them? It's not that important. I'll deal with that some other time, or who cares? Nobody is ever going to know. I'll just keep going with that. God takes our sin seriously. Our bodies are His temple. If anyone destroys God's temple, God will destroy him. Your sin is important. So go before God, confess your sin, and seek righteousness, seek transformation instead.